Order. Question number 3, Metiria TureiI.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou i te whare. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his statements?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Metiria TureiI.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When the Prime Minister said New Zealanders detained in Australia are, quote, free to come home and process their individual case from New Zealand, end quote, did he know that the Australian request for removal from Australia form removed the right of those deportees to continue their visa appeals?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I believe the member to be wrong. Speaker, the member is relying on her interpretation of a form. Actually, the form predates the assurances given to both me by Prime Minister Turnbull and by the Immigration Minister Peter Dutton to Amy Adams. The Immigration Minister has confirmed as early as this afternoon that the form doesn't apply to New Zealanders who have been deported back to New Zealand applying to go back to Australia under appeal. The Minister has confirmed, and we accept his advice, there's already been successful appeals here in New Zealand of New Zealanders going back, and the Minister has confirmed again to Amy Adams that there will be no cost for deportation. Unfortunately, the member's working off incorrect information, and she'd gone to the Minister, not Radio New Zealand. I could have cleared that up for her straight away.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria TureiI.
So is the Prime Minister standing by his statement that he's 100% confident that New Zealanders being deported from Australia will get a fair hearing on their appeals when the form they are required to sign in order to return to New Zealand expressly says that Australian agencies may discontinue their appeals once they leave Australia?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, my understanding, I haven't looked at the form, but I'm advised that the form says they may face that issue. And as I said, the assurances we've had from the Minister of Immigration in Australia is, in fact, that's not the way it's going to be interpreted. There's a special position afforded to New Zealanders on the back of the assurances given by the Australian Prime Minister.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria TureiI.
Has he then asked the Australian authorities to provide written confirmation to every New Zealand deportee who has been required to sign this form before they can leave Australia that the provisions both relating to them paying their own airfares and to the discontinuation of their appeals by Australian authorities does not apply to them?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, firstly, I'm making it clear to the House today that's the advice I've received from the New Zealand Minister of Justice on the back of the assurances that she's received from Peter Dutton, the Australian Immigration Minister. Secondly, my understanding is that Mr Dutton's actually going to put out a statement this afternoon to make sure that that position is understood by New Zealanders, but the position is very clear. While the form says they may be precluded from an appeal, in fact, the way it will be interpreted in Australia for New Zealanders is that doesn't apply.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria TureiI.
Will he ensure that every New Zealander who is required to sign this form is provided written confirmation to them that these provisions will not apply?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, you'd have to really put that question down to the relevant and responsible minister.
Supplementary question, Metiria TureiI.
Well, has the Minister requested of the Australian authorities or his government representatives that these provisions are removed from the form that deportees, New Zealanders, are being required to sign in order to return to New Zealand?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I can't be sure of that because I haven't had a full debrief of the conversation that Amy Adams had with the Australian Minister, but my understanding is that it's a generic form used for everyone, so I doubt that would be the case, but the position is not what's on the form, which says may. The issue is how the form is processed by the Australians, and the Australians have been very clear that the assurances that the Australian Prime Minister gave me and that Peter Dutton gave to Amy Adams is that New Zealanders are free to come back to New Zealand, have their appeals processed from New Zealand. They already are doing so. Some, on the advice of Mr Dutton, have successfully returned to Australia.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria TureiI.
Is the Prime Minister saying that he's prepared to take their word for it on the basis that despite their assurances, New Zealanders are still being required to sign a legal document that is required to be signed before they can come home, that removes those rights from them? And what guarantees can he possibly give to New Zealanders that he hasn't misled them over this issue?
The Right Honourable
Mr.
Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
firstly, the member's incorrect. It does not remove their right. It says it may, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, the assurances I can give them is the assurances I've had from the Australian Prime Minister when he came over to New Zealand, and now from the Minister of Immigration. If the best the member can come up with is that the Minister of Immigration in Australia is going to make those assurances to the New Zealand Minister of Justice, that the Minister of Immigration in Australia is going to say to the Minister of Justice in New Zealand, already some successful appeals have taken place, and thirdly, that the Minister of Immigration in Australia is going to put out a statement confirming all this, that he is lying, well then that's not a very strong argument she's got.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Does he stand by his statement in relation to the lack of PHARMAC funding for Keytruda that quotes, "We've got to give health more money," end quotes, given his government has cut health funding in real terms by $1.7 billion?
The
Speaker,
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member's incorrect about health funding, but he's never been terribly good with numbers. So the health funding's gone up from $11.8 billion in 2008 to $15.9 billion, so that's a $4.1 billion increase. Mr. Speaker, we've also increased the PHARMAC funding from 150 million, from about 650 to about 800 million. But yes, if PHARMAC was to fund Keytruda, by definition it would need more money, and if that wasn't the case, then by definition they'd have to cut funding to some other drugs.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Isn't it true PHARMAC could buy Keytruda and other life-saving medicines if it had the money, but he's tied PHARMAC's hands by starving it of funding?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, no, that's not true, not unless you think increasing its budget by $150 million or putting $4.1 billion extra into health is cutting their funding. Mr. Speaker, in the end, one of the great things about modern science is that there is more and more of these great drugs coming along, and as a country actually will be buying more and more of them, and I have no doubt that a national-led government will continue to increase PHARMAC's budget, and that will allow PHARMAC to buy more drugs.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why has his government increased PHARMAC's budget by only 2% since 2012, when it needed 10% just to keep up with population pressure and inflation? Is that what he calls investing in health?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've increased PHARMAC's funding from $650 million to $800 million. We've increased health expenditure from $11.8 billion to $15.9 billion. Mr. Speaker, there is clearly new and modern drugs coming onto the market, but actually the way for PHARMAC and actually New Zealand to be able to afford those is to have a strong and vibrant economy, and that's what a national government is delivering.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Is it okay that Australians right now are getting life-saving treatment with Keytruda for free, while Kiwis like Tessa Taylor are selling their homes and begging for money to buy it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, there are always a range of drugs that are not funded by the government or take some period of time to be funded by the government. We rely on the efficacy advice from PHARMAC, and if you look at the current advice that PHARMAC has had, they have examined 8 months' worth of data when it comes to Keytruda. One interesting thing about that is 1 in 3 patients in the trial have had a clear benefit. The other 2/3 have not. There's not to say that it wouldn't work for the particular individual in question. It might, and the government over time will be increasing PHARMAC's budget, and we'll see where that goes in terms of which drugs it funds.
Supplementary question, Marama Fox.
To the Prime Minister, how would the Prime Minister respond to the detainees who report that they are being withheld food in order to pressure them to sign the papers having them removed to New Zealand?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Oh, Mr Speaker, I need that to be actually clarified as being correct. It sounds extremely unlikely. But, Mr Speaker, as I said earlier, the form in question that the member is talking about predates this particular issue. We've had these assurances and successful appeals have already been processed, according to Mr Dutton.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Madam Fox.
Is the Prime Minister aware whether or not the detainees who are being deported back to New Zealand know whether or not they can have legal aid in New Zealand to appeal their decisions?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the advice I've had from the Minister of Justice is they're not eligible for legal aid in New Zealand.
Question number 4, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.